The Wise Man in the Village. Part 1, The Hidden One. I had never been part of the village. My house, tucked away at the edge of the forest, had always been my sanctuary. I was the man who kept to himself, an old recluse whose name was whispered in town but whose face was rarely seen. People assumed I was odd, perhaps even mad, but I had my reasons for staying hidden. The world outside my cabin was full of noise and chaos, things I had no interest in. I had no family, no one to hold me to this place. My books and the wind were my only companions. That was until the harvest failed. A harsh drought had swept through the region, and the villagers were desperate. Crops withered, animals fell sick, and the future seemed uncertain. I watched from my window, seeing how the people I had ignored for years struggled. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, my life had been solitary for a reason, untouched by their burdens. But that was before I saw her, the little girl, eyes wide with fear, staring at the dying crops in her family's field. Her tears were the first sound I had heard in days that unsettled me. She wasn't the only one. The entire village seemed to be on the brink of despair. And then something unexpected happened, something I couldn't ignore. Part 2, The Decision. It started with a single question that kept echoing in my mind. What if? What if I could help them? What if my years of silence and solitude had not been wasted? What if, just this once, I stepped out of my shell and did something useful? I had spent my life observing nature, learning its cycles, its secrets. I had read countless books and spoken to the wind, the trees, the animals. All this knowledge, I had kept it to myself, buried deep within these walls. But now, the world outside was calling for it. The decision wasn't easy. My heart raced as I made my way to the village square, my hands shaking slightly. It had been years since I had walked among them, and I wasn't sure how they would react to my sudden appearance. But there was no turning back. I stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of the village. So much had changed, yet it felt strangely familiar. And then, I spoke. Do you need help? My voice cracked like a branch breaking underfoot. The villagers stopped what they were doing and turned to face me. There was silence. One by one, they came forward. Their faces were skeptical, but there was something in their eyes, a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could help them. Part 3, Lessons of the Earth. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. There was no room for small talk now. I showed them how to read the sky, how to listen to the land, how to make the most of the meager resources they had. It wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding life itself. I taught the villagers how to use the sun and the moon to guide their planting, how to find hidden springs, and how to listen to the whispers of the wind. I shared the wisdom of the earth, simple truths that had been passed down through generations, though long forgotten by those who had forgotten to live in harmony with nature. But I also taught them lessons about life, how to be patient, how to wait for the right moment, how to forgive and forget, because bitterness only poisoned the soul, and how to find joy in the smallest of things, even in the hardest times. Each lesson was met with disbelief, but then came the results. The crops began to flourish in ways no one expected. People who had lost hope started to smile again. There was magic in the earth, yes, but it was also in the people. Their hearts had been hard, but now, they were beginning to soften. Part 4, A Dark Turn. But not everything was as it seemed. Just as I began to feel the warmth of connection with the villagers, something darker started to unfold. At night, I would hear whispers outside my window, dark rumors, schemes. A group of villagers, once grateful for my help, had begun to question my intentions. Some said I was a sorcerer, others claimed I had dark powers. And then came the worst accusation, the one I had been dreading for years. They said I had cursed the village. I wasn't ready for this. I had never desired power. I had only wanted to teach, to give what I knew to those who could benefit from it. But now, I had become the target of their fears. Part 5, Confrontation. One evening, as I stood by the fire, a group of villagers approached me. Their faces were hard, their eyes filled with suspicion. You've done something to us, one of them accused. The drought, the blight, it's all your fault. I didn't say a word. Instead, I walked into the center of the village square, where the villagers had gathered. The tension in the air was palpable. I've helped you, I said simply. I showed you the way, but it is your choice whether to follow. You can blame me for your misfortune, but the truth is. I paused, letting the silence grow heavy. You are the ones who must change. Only then will the earth respond. The village fell quiet. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, they began to leave, their heads hanging low. Some ashamed, some still uncertain. But I knew I had planted the seed. I had done my part. The rest was up to them. Part 6, The Legacy. Time passed. The villagers worked together, and slowly, the land healed. The crops grew tall, the rivers ran clear, and the air was fresh with the scent of life. They had learned, not just from me, but from the earth itself. And as for me, I returned to my cabin at the edge of the forest, my work done. Years later, a young man approached me. He had been a boy when I first helped the village. "I remember what you taught us," he said, "and now, I want to teach others." It was then that I realized, my time was over. But my lessons, my knowledge, had not been in vain. The next generation was ready to carry it forward. My story, though hidden in the shadows, would live on in the hearts of those who truly understood the way of life. And so, my name was no longer whispered in fear. It was spoken with respect. I was no longer just the old recluse by the forest. I had become something more, a teacher, a guide, a legacy. Part 7, The Return. Years passed in quiet solitude. The seasons came and went, and the world outside seemed to move on without me. My life, once full of teachings and lessons, had settled into a rhythm of peaceful reflection. The fire that once burned so brightly in my heart had grown dim, not from age, but from the passage of time and the quiet return of my old habits. But one day, something unexpected happened. The same young man who had come to me years ago, with the same light in his eyes, returned. This time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a group of people, young and old alike. Some were familiar faces from the village, now older and wiser, others were strangers to me. They had heard of my teachings, they had seen the change in their community, and they had come to learn more. "I remember," the young man said, stepping forward, "but there's more we need to understand. More you haven't told us." I had prepared myself for this moment, though I hadn't expected it so soon. These people, these eager souls, were ready to take what I had started and push it further. And though I was content with my quiet life, I couldn't deny that something stirred in me, a spark, a reminder of the urgency that once burned in my chest. They needed more from me, and I could not refuse them. Part 8, The Darker Side of Knowledge. The teachings I had shared with the village were not all light. There were lessons hidden in shadows, things I had never dared to speak of before. The balance between life and death, nature's harsher truths, the way the land could heal or destroy. It wasn't always a simple matter of knowing when to plant or how to care for the crops. There were deeper, darker forces at work, and they were not always as kind as the sun or the rain. I had kept these lessons locked away, knowing they would stir fear, confusion, even despair. But now, as the group of villagers and seekers stood before me, I realized that they had to know. The earth was a delicate balance. To respect it fully, they had to understand both the beauty and the terror that lay beneath its surface. I began to teach them about the shadows, about the silent forces that shaped the world but were often ignored. We live in harmony with nature, but nature is not always kind, I told them one evening, under the glow of a waxing moon. To ignore the darkness is to make ourselves vulnerable to it. They listened in silence as I told them of the spirits of the forest, of the forgotten gods that demanded respect, of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of the land. But as I spoke, something in the air began to change. The wind grew colder, the night darker. The first of the young villagers trembled, unsure whether they were ready to hear what I had to say. But it was too late to turn back. The door had been opened. Part 9, The Test. The true test came when one of the villagers, a young man with a fierce spirit, decided to challenge the teachings. He doubted the old ways, saw them as superstition, something that had no place in the world of progress and technology. "These are just stories," he said one evening, standing before me and the others. "The world has moved beyond these old beliefs. We need to learn about crops and water, not ghosts and spirits." His words were like a crack in the earth. The ground beneath us seemed to shudder as the village watched, the winds howling as if in response. I turned to face him. "Do you truly believe that what you see is all that exists? That the world is only as you understand it?" I knew the answer before he spoke. "I'm not afraid of your old ways," he said defiantly, "and I won't live my life in fear of things that aren't real." The moment the words left his mouth, the earth trembled. The villagers gasped as the ground cracked open beneath the young man's feet, a deep, growling sound rising from below. It wasn't an illusion. The dark forces were real. They were here, testing him, testing us all. "Fear is the first step to understanding," I said, my voice calm despite the chaos around us. "Fear is what will teach you respect for the things you cannot see. Fear is what will save your life." The young man stumbled back in terror as the ground settled again. The villagers were silent, their faces pale with realization. Part 10, The Legacy continued. After that night, everything changed. The young man, who had once doubted, came to me in quiet humility. He asked for forgiveness, for guidance. He understood, as the others did, that the world was not just about the physical. There was more, much more, than what could be touched or seen. And so, we continued our work. The village flourished in ways I hadn't imagined, but it was the knowledge of both light and dark that truly gave them strength. They had learned the balance. As the seasons passed and the years slipped by, I knew my time was coming to an end. The younger generation had learned all I could teach them. They were ready to carry my lessons into the future, to teach others what I had taught them. I returned to my cabin, the forest now my true home once again. But I had left a part of myself with them, my teachings, my legacy. And as the wind whispered through the trees, I knew the village would never forget the wise man who had walked among them, and the lessons they had learned from the earth itself. What if your fears and doubts were actually the key to your salvation? How would you change your life if you heard the silence that hides the greatest power?